Hey, welcome to Morphology in the Classroom with Literacy Connection. So this video is all about running a morphology lesson. What is the structure? What are the elements of the lesson? So firstly, we'll have a look at the teaching strategies that sit behind the lesson. So one of these is looking at word sums. So the reason we would do this is it supports spelling. So it shows how morphemes can be combined. So we've got un and wrap. So it's like a little math sum. Un plus wrap gives us unwrap. So we don't use equals because it's not exactly equal. We're joining them together, and sometimes we need to think of spelling. So when we are joining these morphemes, we need to check our spelling. So we bring in some of our spelling rules. So if we've got beauty plus full plus lee, then if we're looking at beautifully, when we combine those morphemes in the word sum, we need to be aware to check our joins, is often what we say, and change that Y to an I. Morpheme matrix. So the morpheme matrices, they help with spelling and meaning. It helps to unpack the different elements of the morphemes to help us with meaning and also definitely for spelling. So you read the matrix from left to right. You cannot jump columns. And the morphemes may appear in more than one column. So you can see here that we've got an S in one column so that we can do acts or reacts. And then we also have an S in the far column there so we can have reactions if we're reading left to right. So you can find a number of these matrices online. You can create your own, and they are just a handy way to either work as a whole class to see how many words you can come up with, or as an independent activity. So for example, if you were running this with your whole class and asking the class to write down as many words as they can using this matrix, then these would be the possible ones. Okay, there I think something like 80 words that contain acts. So it's not all of them, but it's the ones linked to the matrix. And then we can go the other way where we have the words and then you've got to be able to fit them into the matrix. So it's a little bit trickier because I need to know, do I need to put those morphemes in more than one place? So this is quite a good independent activity as well and helps us to unpack words and spell and learn meanings. So that would be the answer for that one. And again, you can see the S is in two places there, so we can have extracts, but we can also have contractions. Okay, etymology, we'd also be using it in our lessons. So it's helpful when we're introducing our morphemes, particularly for our older children, to introduce that language of origin. So for example, chrono meaning time, it's a Greek origin. And then we could use that etymology. So either in real time as a class-led investigation or for independent work to just look a little bit deeper into words. So they could look up word origins or break words into separate morphemes. So once we become sort of morphology champions, we can have a look at a word like a chronotherapist and maybe just breaking them down to the morphemes first. So we already knew that chrono was time and therapy is healing. And if we add ist at the end, it's a person who. So even without that definition, we could be word detectives and know, okay, we've got time, we've got healing, we've got a person who does that. So when you look at the actual definition, a person who administers medication at certain times of the day. The other interesting strategy for morphology is to bring in pseudo words. So I generally just do this in teacher guidance. So during the whole class section of the lesson, we can introduce pseudo words and it reinforces the meaning of the morpheme. So it's a great meaning check. So if we're looking at the prefix sub, which we know means under, and then we introduce a word that doesn't exist, it's like, oh, here is a spongin. A spongin is a pile of cushions. We could say, oh, look in the classroom, there's a spongin in the corner, it's a pile of cushions. So if something lives in a sub-spongin environment, where does it live? It must live under the pile of cushions. So when you can do this, it's also quite fun if children create their own pseudo words while they're studying prefixes or suffixes as well. Or you could create a word and children have to illustrate it. It's just a fun strategy to check for understanding. So every morphology lesson has these elements of reading, spelling, and meaning. So reading is to support our decoding. And particularly when we're looking at our morphemes are really creating multi-syllable words. So if we can train our brains to break long words into morpheme chunks, that will help us to decode, will help us to spell, and it will help us with meaning. So we have those three elements in every lesson. So when we are reading words, this is what our brain is doing. We're looking at the phonology, so looking at the letter sound correspondence. We're looking at the orthography. So that's really how the word it looks or spells. So that's meat versus meat there. And then morphology, we're looking at those prefixes and suffixes as we're reading words. And then within the context of the sentence, that will help us with meaning. So these things are happening almost, all at the same time at lightning speed. So that's an example there of the word crane, that we're breaking it down to the sounds. So the k, r, a, n, and then the spelling, and then the meanings, because in a word like crane, we've got potentially three different meanings that we could be using with that word. So when we're supporting reading, we introduce the phoneme at the start. So we might be looking at the prefix dis, D-I-S. It's a prefix, it means not or no. So we would possibly, at the start of the lesson, in a similar way with spelling, that we would have that call and answer or choral response, so that all the class is saying that dis is a prefix that is spelt D-I-S. How is it spelt D-I-S? What does it mean not or known? What does it mean not or no? And then we bring in an example. So dislike, we show how it works. So it means to not like. So the dis adds the opposite there to the word. So then we practice reading words with the dis prefix. So in a lesson, we would have one word per page, just kind of like a sound pack, and read these together. So we're really kind of training our children to break that word into a prefix and base. So distrust, discount, then we're starting to get a couple of extra syllables going on there. Disobey, disagree, disqualify, discontinue. So the idea is that it's stopping that overwhelm when we're seeing long words, if we can separate the prefixes and suffixes. So just some teacher notes around that reading side of it, that we'd always begin with 2-syllable words that are simple chunks, like our dis plus trust, and then increase complexity into 3 or maybe 4-syllable words, depending on the age of your children. And then you can bring in some of the suffixes that you've previously taught as well, so that you're reviewing that. And here is a little bit of word of warning, and it is a bit tricky, and particularly if you start bringing AI into this, making sure that the word choices match the definition of the prefix or suffix. So there'll be hundreds of words that begin with dis, D-I-S, but are they all words where dis acts as a prefix that means not or no? So we've got disobey means does not obey. So yes, it's definitely a word we'd want to be studying. However, if we've got athletics and we're looking at the discus, that's nothing to do with the dis prefix or distant. They've come from different base or roots. So if you're unsure, check the etymology and make sure all the words that you're selecting do match the meaning of the prefix. Okay, then we move on to the spelling. So we've read some words, and then we break short words into phonemes. So normally when we're learning to read and spell, we just have those single syllable words, and we are spelling by breaking the word into phonemes. So clock would be broken into k, l, o, k, and then that's how we spell. But morphology is helping us to encode multi-syllable words. So if we had, a 10 or 12 letter multi-syllable word, we don't want to sit there breaking that down into 10 different sounds. It's not the most efficient way to do it. So if we are faced with spelling a word like disappear, it helps to know that it is the prefix dis plus appear. And the great thing with that is once you understand that, then you're never going to have that spelling error of a double S, because we've just literally got that word sum dis plus appear. We don't need to double the S when we've added the prefix. There are though spelling rules that come in with adding suffixes. So usually prefixes, we just add the prefix. We don't have a lot of unusual spelling things going on there. It's contract is con plus tract, and misspell is miss plus spell. Again, that's why there is two S's there. But suffixes, there are suffix rules, and they very much come on board with your spelling program as well. So you've possibly taught these already. So we have rules for words that end in E. So if you've got a word that ends in E and you want to add a suffix to it, there are rules to go with that. Adding suffixes to 111 words and adding suffixes to words that end in Y. So for example, the 111 doubling rule. Is it one syllable, one vowel, one consonant? So a word like run, one syllable, one vowel, one short vowel in there, and one consonant. So then, if that is the case, then when we add a suffix, we will double that final consonant. So running needs two N's. So we've got other examples there, sit and hop. So sit, hopped. And then the drop E rule for when we are adding suffixes to words that end in E. So if it is a vowel suffix like ed or ing, er, then we would drop the E. So bake goes to baking, drop that E. But if we're adding a suffix that begins with a consonant, so ful, ly, ment, then we keep the E. And the spelling rule for adding suffixes to words that end in Y. So if we are adding a vowel suffix, change the Y to I. So happy to happier, try to tried. But if it's a vowel plus Y, then we keep the Y and add suffix there. So if we've got a consonant right next to our Y, change it to I. If we've got a vowel before the Y, then we keep the Y there. So we've got some great examples there. Happy, try, both we replace with I. Play and boy, we keep the Y there. So it's good to practice those rules in morphology and in spelling. Okay, and then when we've got our whole class explicit teaching with the spelling, just like we would do in a spelling lesson, for morphology, we can include a dictated sentence. So this is a great way of doing that you do check. So we can do this sort of with a we do with some support or you do. And if you can include 3 examples of words that have the morpheme just to check spelling. So in a routine very similar to what you would have in your spelling lesson. So for example, if we were looking at the prefix dis, this is where AI is potentially helpful to create the sentence for you. We will do a disservice to the group if we disconnect and make our trust disappear. And, you know, I've been sneaky there that we've got a double S because we're adding dis to a word beginning with S, but we don't have the double S in disappear because it's just dis plus appear. So we're really just checking what's going on with the word sums when we add the prefix to the base word. Other thing we can do with spelling is to select from non-examples. So basically a multi-choice type little quiz here that when you've got the whole class in front of you, you could teach children how to do hand signals for A, B, C, or D, or just quickly write an A, B, C, or D on a mini whiteboard if you've got children using those. So, you know, here we have a whole bunch of possibilities for disappear, and I've probably seen all of them in children's writing. So once you understand it's dis plus appear, then hopefully it's obvious for our children as they're looking at those examples. And also what we can do with spelling is completing those word sums. So either in books or in whiteboards. So the dis plus trust, they are writing the answer to the sum. When we're doing spelling rules, and this really needs to be repeated quite a lot of times because these rules can be quite tricky. So once we've taught the rules, we can practice these with tables. Again, this could be done on a mini whiteboard or in a book or in an independent activity. So, you know, adding ing to make, okay, we need to drop the E. What does that look like? Drum. So that is the 111 rule. So we need to double the M. Happy, we've got a consonant before the Y, so we need to change the Y to an I, and play. That's when we're working with a Y word again, and we've got the vowel before Y, so we hold on to the Y in that case. Okay, so then we move from spelling into meaning. So that is our vocabulary building time. And so I often refer to this as being word detectives. So our knowledge of morphemes is helping us to understand meaning. So when we know those meanings of prefixes, base words, suffixes, often we can work out the meaning of the word. So if re means, return or do again, so recharge, charge again, or retract, to pull or drag back. So to do that again or to return. So, for example, during our whole class lesson, we could do these word detectives if we've been studying the prefix chrono and we mean that as time, then what does anachronism mean? So we might have to let our class know that ana means backwards, chrono is time, and ism means that we've formed a noun. So having a chat, and there's going to be a lot of guesses out there, but we're talking about something that has a backwards time about it. And then have a look, we can all look up the definition together. So it's something belonging to a previous time in history. So it's an anachronism when we're seeing something like an old-fashioned horse-drawn carriage in a modern street. They might come up with other examples as well. And then also we could be doing this as a whole class, filling out that table and just getting children to do this in mini whiteboards. So if we've got the word hypoglycemia and we've been understanding that hypo means low or under, and we've got the base word there as glyco as sugar. So it's something about having low sugar and the same, so low body heat and the place under foundation, so hypothesis. So that's where the word hypothesis comes in. It's the foundation under the science experiment. Okay, and then also we can do an etymology search. So could have all of our children in front of us, break them into pairs, and they can do a quick search of the word. Let's have a look at where the word telepathy comes from. So we've already been maybe looking at tele, meaning at a distance, and then pathy with feeling. So how does that word make sense? So it's receiving someone else's thoughts across a distance. And again, the old pseudo words are handy for a definition perspective as well. So even if we're looking at something as simple as the suffix s for plurals, if this is one smort, then this must be two smorts. So it's a great way of checking that understanding of plurals. And we could do the same thing here. We've just invented this strange shape, which is called a dingle. So if that's a dingle, what's a semi-dingle then? Is it two dingles together or is it a half a dingle? So it's making us use our understanding of semi meaning half. And then here is our word mat in action as well. So generally this can be done independently, but we might do that as a we do altogether as well until we're building the independence with it. So looking at starting off with a word, spectacular, but then go, okay, we're going to look in at the morpheme spect. So we've got the full word spectacular. What's the morpheme spect? So then we're going to pull apart, okay, what does that morpheme mean? It's to see or watch. It's can be a prefix and a suffix, and it means to impressive to see. So we've got some word families there where we've used it both as a prefix and a suffix. So spectator, retrospect, and then a sentence. So it's a great independent activity. And then we move, so once we've done our reading, spelling, and meaning all together in the lesson, then we move to independent tasks, which can be done, back at tables and desks. So there is a worksheet task for every morpheme, and some of the tasks that are in that worksheet are matching images to words, a morpheme matrix, particularly when we're looking at bases, word sums, match the definition, sentence close activities, an etymology match, or circle the correct spelling. So here's an example of a sheet looking at the suffix CIAN. So we've got some match the word to pictures there. That's just to help a little bit with meaning and spelling, and then word sums. But you can see it gets a little bit trickier because you've got tactics plus CIN. So you need to go that it's a tactician. It's not just tactics with CIAN added in there. So you're going to need a dictionary or online dictionary to help you with that, and write that CIAN with that matches the etymology. So someone who's skilled in sorcery, what might that be? And they could work together as a kind of a we do together task in tables as well. So they are all your options for the lessons. So we're starting off introducing the morpheme, going into reading words, spelling, and then meaning, and then breaking into independent tasks. So we're looking at a similar kind of timing to a spelling lesson of around that kind of 15 to 20 minutes.